Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Chicago's Zooming with the Alderman series of interviews. My name is Deborah Halpern, and the League was founded 101 years ago right here in Chicago. The League is a nonpartisan political organization. We encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we hope to influence public policy through education and advocacy. And you should know that the Chicago League is one of hundreds of local leagues all across the country. These interviews with the aldermen are part of our effort to educate the people about those who represent us in setting the policies and ordinances that govern us here in Chicago. And today, our guest is Alderman Andre Vasquez Jr. And he is in the 40th Ward. And so welcome, Alderman Vasquez.
Hi, thanks for having me, Deborah.
We sincerely appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And I want everybody to know, please know that this Zoom session is being recorded and will be available for viewing after today on the League website. And we'll be sending you, Alderman, and everyone who registered for this program who is not a League member, a link to the video when it becomes available. Also, everyone should know that we have provided the Alderman with a copy of the questions I'll be asking ahead of time. However, before we start on those questions, we want to show everyone a map of all 50 wards in Chicago. And you can see the cursor is focused on the 40th Ward. And now we would like to focus on just the 40th Ward so that you can see exactly what we're talking about. Okay. And on that note, we're going to get started. So, Alderman, based on that map, can you please describe your ward? For example, where is it and what are the main boundaries? It's very hard to see that on just a quick video. What neighborhoods does it include? What's the general makeup? And what is that center island in the middle of your ward?
Sure, yeah. So 40th Ward, the boundaries are loosely from Leland to Devon, south going north, and from east to west, Clark to the river. So you're looking at Andersonville, Edgewater, Lincoln Square, Bowmanville, Bud Longwoods, Arcadia Terrace. Those are the neighborhoods in the ward. As far as the island in the middle, that would be Rose Hill Cemetery.
And that's a rather famous cemetery.
Yeah, that's right. It's got a lot of history there, a lot of former voters.
So what are a few of the key issues facing the people in your ward today?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I talk to neighbors at the door, now that we can again, the main two issues I think citywide end up being property taxes and public safety, right? I think those are the two big ones. When I think about 40th Ward, aside from that also is affordability. The 40th Ward is one of the more affluent parts of town. So it's a lot harder for people to be able to find places to live in 40. So that's something we've been really working on, something that I ran on and something that now that we're in council that we've been working to improve.
Okay, and can you tell me, is it primarily residential? Do you have, I know that, you have a lot of retail and restaurants in your area because I've enjoyed them.
Yeah. So it is primarily residential. We've got a lot of good business strips where we have about 56,000 neighbors that live in the 40th Ward. You mentioned in the prior question kind of a little bit of the makeup. So it's 52% white, 25% Latino, 17% Asian, both East and South Asian, and 7% Black. So it's a nice spread. And then when it comes to the average median income, it's about 80,000 a year. So it is mostly residential, but it's about an even mix of renter and owner.
Okay. And a little bit more about you now. When did you first join City Council? And why did you decide to run in 2019?
Yeah, so I got elected in 2019, started May 20th, which was the day before my birthday, which is why I don't forget that date. So I was born and raised in the city. My parents were immigrants from Guatemala. We had been gentrified out of about 5 different neighborhoods growing up. You know, the rent got too high and we'd have to move, which led to me being in like 4 different public schools growing up. From there, I worked retail most of my life, and I but also happened to be a rapper for 15 years. It's kind of like a musical art hobby. So I worked retail, went from my first job was at Kids R Us as a cashier slash stock slash janitor. And then at the end of my whole career prior to coming to office, I became the uh, area manager for the state of Illinois when it came to AT&T marketing, internet, and cable. So Chicago made me who I am, good, bad, and all in between. And I thought about what my parents had gone through for me to have a foundation. You know, my dad was a shoe repair guy, and my mom worked at an envelope factory in the third late night shift. And so as I met my wife and we had our kids, I kind of reflected on all the sacrifices they made for me to have a good foundation and thought about what I wanted to leave behind. You know, we're not all going to be here forever. And what are my kids going to inherit? And so that led me to really think about kind of taking my management plus my political, because I became a community organizer while doing all that, and really looking at potentially running for office. I had met Bernie Sanders in 2015. Some local friends invited me to meet him, and it was the first time I met a presidential candidate, anyone who was really kind of involved in politics directly. That led to me going to Iowa to knock on doors as my first kind of political action. Came back here and put together a fundraiser, and through that, learned how to community organize. So um, I was a little naive, and when I thought about running for office, I was like, well, you know, what's a map that's doable? State maps are big, districts are big, you know, wards small. So, so I kind of focused my efforts on that. And we, over a number of like 3 years from like 2015, 2016 to 2019, just started really organizing neighbors on the ground. And I remember then, you know, people would start saying like, so you're going to do it. And what I always told our folks was, you know, if the opportunity presents itself and there are enough people that are able to organize to do the thing, like we'll do it. And so that led to me running against someone who at the time was the chair of the finance committee, the mayor's floor leader, had been in office for 36 years, and put $1.5 million on a campaign to try to keep us from coming into office. And we were successful. I think we were in a moment where people wanted to see a change in leadership. And then, as I kind of joke, our grand prize was a global pandemic after we won. So, you know, it's definitely helped me have a better understanding of everything that we can do in this role. And I'm really fortunate to be in the position to lead and really take care of our neighbors during this time.
Wow. Well, that is all really interesting. I don't want to miss an opportunity to wish you happy birthday next month.
Thank you. That's awesome. I appreciate
And and I also was wondering, since you met Bernie and we're all excited about him in 2015, were you working for him this past election?
it. So it kind of lined up very closely to like the committee person race. So we were kind of finding a way to work together, and I kind of learned that sometimes we're better served focusing on the race that we have to worry on rather than kind of pairing up. So we did try to partner up, but I think definitely learned a lot through that experience about how to best affect change and be successful at doing so.
Got it. Do you currently have any other employment beyond your alderman responsibilities?
No, when I got elected, I left my position. I was at AT&T at the time, kind of in a business executive role. And I knew when I ran, like this is a full-time job as much as people want to claim it's a part-time one. I actually think it should be formally changed legally
Okay.
because I don't know how anyone at all could do all the work that we need to do for our neighbors and also have a second job and be able to effectively do either of them.
Is there any chance you would want to propose that to council?
Yeah, so Alderman Raymond Lopez has proposed it. I'm definitely in support. I think where it meets current challenge is because there are members of the council who hold down like their lawyers or something else.
Mhm.
They kind of lobby against it. So that's been some of the challenge.
Right. And one more question on your background. Are you still rapping anywhere that our viewers can go watch you?
I appreciate you asking that. So when I ran, and part of this was some of the attacks when we were running, as a rapper, I will say I was very ignorant. I said things that were homophobic and misogynistic, hip hop culture. I went from someone who was never in the front of the room, right? Because as someone who was going through different schools, I was very socially awkward. So I used to write poetry, became kind of a rapper. And what happens sometimes is you go from someone who doesn't get attention to being cheered on for battle rapping, which is insulting someone in front of you and trying to be clever while rhyming. And there's a lot of culture that's baked in toxic masculinity there. So I said a lot of things that I'm regretful of. And so when we ran, that was what a lot of the attacks were. And I thought it was a fair conversation to have. And I think being able to admit when you've done something wrong, to work to make amends, it's something that I've been doing my best to model. I'll say that therapy is extremely helpful as well. So I've rapped maybe twice since then, but I'm very mindful of like not leaning into it too much, because I don't want people to think that like you do a thing just because you were running and now you're like, oh, it's totally okay. And so trying to manage that while also, I don't want people thinking I'm out here trying to get a record deal while being in office. So we're trying to figure out a way to balance it out. Like most of the time, what I do is, being the vice chair of the special events committee and cultural affairs, is to really kind of bring more art to the district and more creativity and expression in a way that kind of fills that part of my life.
Well, that is a great transition, because I was wondering, what are the matters that typically come up before this committee, the special events, cultural affairs, recreations, and while you're describing that, what did your committee do when the city closed down as you prepared for when we might open up?
Yeah, so a lot of what comes before that committee is park related matters, larger events, smaller neighborhood fairs, any kind of city activities, cultural events like holidays come up. So it's interesting. Out of all the committees, it doesn't really have a lot of meetings, but when it does, it's usually appointments to like the park district. And so as we saw, there was scandal with the park district, not too long ago. A lot of the conversations came before the committee, and we'd have to ask the appointees, like, you tell us your take. You want to be appointed to this board, and we know there are concerns. So like, how do you address that? As it came to like events, trying to figure out what we were going to do as the city was kind of closing down and the whole world was a bit of a challenge. And something that's come up as well is holidays like Columbus Day is one that's been fairly like contentious. And so having those conversations at the committees has been helpful. I mean, I think there's things that we can move and we could take more leadership on, but it's good to at least engage and have the conversation with our peers about all these matters.
Was there any resolution to the conversations around Columbus Day?
No, although I think some folks might have seen the mayor's conversations about Columbus Day, but I don't. Right now, I believe there's a board that's trying to look at all the different landmarks to see which ones should remain. Are there any that should be removed? And it's hard, especially because you're looking at what will be basically an election year. I think people are more hesitant to kind of make those decisions. That being said, what I've always said is we need to find a way to kind of bridge the gap to make sure that our Italian community understands that we want to celebrate the heritage, but there are other figures that can do that. When you think about what Columbus's impact and harm have done to so many different indigenous populations, like in the country in Central America, like I think there's a way to bridge that, but we need to be able to have the conversations together to find out how best to do it.
Great that you're having those conversations. Are there any sneak previews you can share about what special events are happening this summer in Chicago?
So it's funny you asked that. I think, some of the things will be moving kind of in the fashion we're used to. I know something that I actually had a call earlier today was looking at Winnemac Park, which is in the 40th ward. Every year there's a July 4th unofficial event where people come and do their fireworks. And so what I'm trying to do is transition it into a more formal, controlled, and safer event, like a fourth fest, so to speak. And so we're having conversations now to see who would be interested in organizing it, talking to the committee for cultural affairs and also the park district to see what can be done between now and July 4th to see if we can get something going.
Got it. Okay, so you've been in the council for almost 4 years now. And what, if any, changes would you like to see made in the operation of the council?
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind first is the committee chair appropriations. So to kind of set the stage, right? You've got 50 city council members. You want to get 26 to vote on a thing because that's the majority most of the time. When we first took office, one of your first major votes is voting on the committees, who will be on the committees, who are the chairs of those committees. Those chairs suddenly get a much larger budget to hire staff, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands more dollars to be able to spend on staff. There's been stories of one of our chairs or former chairs being $1 million over budget, for example. Yeah. So what happens in that dynamic where if you're a chair and you suddenly get more funding for staff and the mayor appoints committee chairs, you get your kiss the ring dynamic, right? Of like, hey, you're now committee chair. You can have a little more control over legislation. You've got more budget and more staff. So there's this implicit, one would hope actually one would hope it wasn't implicit at all or any conversation, that if you're being supported to be a chair, that you're somewhat loyal to a mayor, and that's what causes the dynamic. So in our term, it went from 16 chairs or committees to 18 of them. Right now, one would imagine you've got to get to 26 votes, and you got 18 of them almost lined up potentially. You only need 8 more votes to pass legislation, and it becomes much harder to have open democratic conversations and votes because of the nature of what those seats bring. So I would change where the funding goes for those committees. I think it's fair to have staff that you pay for to get work done, but there needs to be more that's like allocated to your actual ward offices, because I'd argue that a lot of the alders need more staff to take care of the services that the city's supposed to provide. So I'd say that's like a fundamental imbalance that I would look at. I also would keep committees now at hybrid, where you could do it virtual or in person. I think sometimes there's an inclination to go back to normal, quote unquote, when as a neighbor, I think you're better served if we're able to be in our wards more often, get on a committee call, come back out and make sure we're taking care of potholes, garbage, and all the, your bread and butter issues.
Are they talking about stopping hybrid committee
Yes.
meetings?
Yeah,
Oh,
I was trying to actually get that changed at the state level because it's by statute. And because there
okay.
was an executive order from the state, that's what allowed us to go to hybrid. And so there are many people even now, like about a week ago, people were asking like, oh, would you like to do our committees back in person? And if you could imagine, let's say you got 2 committee meetings, right? One at 9 a.m., one at 2 o'clock, and you have
Okay.
nothing in between. You're going to go downtown and stay there all day just to make 2 committee hearings as opposed to being back in the ward and taking care of your neighbors. So I think that needs to be improved.
Got it. Okay. So what are a few of the actions you mentioned up front that one of the 2 issues in your ward, you said taxes and security. And so the whole issue regarding gun control and violence, what are a few of the actions by the city to reduce gun violence that you think have been effective or
Sure.
possibly not effective?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say first, the city ends up being very limited on what it can do because a lot of gun control is more of the state and federal level, right? So as much as one could try to do things to contain it, let's say in the city, you've got stuff coming from other states as well. and the proliferation of those guns is clearly a problem. But I think what the city has begun to do, and I would say it should have done decades ago, is really investing in marginalized communities, mental health services, substance abuse issues, because when you think about the criminal activity that we have going on, I think it's easy to disassociate with the humanity of people who might be committing crime. And the reason why I kind of frame it that way is if you spend more time focusing on what environment creates a person who thinks that that's a way to move forward, addressing that environment is actually a good way to address the root cause of the issue, right? Police, I'd argue, are more reactive and work to contain a situation rather than addressing it at its source. And so when you look at what causes the problem here in Chicago, you're talking about 100 years of disinvestment in communities. It went from being so segregated on racial lines that funding would go, disproportionately to those who were already kind of more privileged to begin with and have more political power. So I think when you look at that over generations, you end up with families who didn't have the same access to education, to jobs, who don't have the same resources for food or housing. And over generations of that, you end up in situations where gang culture becomes more of an alternative for people, where the parental structures are broken apart because somebody could have gotten arrested when they were a kid and now they functionally can't be a parent in the same manner. And so if we don't address those structural things, we're going to find ourselves just continuing the same behaviors and the same kind of political tough on crime rhetoric. You see it's on the 80s, 90s, thousands, and continues on. So I think some of the federal funding that we received due to COVID, seeing it last year in our budget as beginning to address those issues, I think is important. I understand that you don't see the result of that investment immediately. It is a more a longer term strategy. So we also work with more immediate issue or immediate resources, like there are gang intervention teams. These are folks who are former gang members who have made it out of the lifestyle and seek to bring more people out of it, who mitigate some of the gang conflict in ways that have made the 40th ward safer. And I can say that from experience here seeing it. So it's being able to fund things over the long term that address the root cause, but also have answers for the immediate when issues occur. And that's working with those groups as well as with the police departments as needed, as well as with other, public resources that we have.
And so what's great is the way you've just described, and that the city is currently investing in these marginalized communities and try to address these issues. And yes, it is a given that what we really need is federal and state legislation. However, do you have any other ideas that you think the city could do regarding the violence or gun control, violence in particular?
Yeah, I'll say it's separate from being in city council, like how you would address the issue, right? Like, it's interesting to me that we've got all these devices, right, that are like, they're tied to your Face ID now, they're tied to fingerprints, right? And we could do that with technology and devices. And the fact that we haven't done that with guns, for example, kind of baffles me, right? You could put, little GPS microchips and know where they are. You could get it to where if you are registered and get it legally, you can have it registered to your identification and you could report it if it got stolen or something. So I think there's so much more we could do as far as technology and being able to track that we just don't. And that's not something I believe a city can lead on, but I think from a federal level, it's kind of a no-brainer. But as we've seen, like NRA and like I'd say certain parties are against it because they view it as a oppression of their liberties. But I'd argue that we're kind of unique, unfortunately, in this country when it comes to gun violence, and it's because of the culture we've kind of had here.
That's a really interesting idea, and frankly, I haven't heard anybody really bring that up in the past. But if we live in a country where there are more guns than people, so right. There's, in my mind, there's something wrong with that. But this is your show, not mine.
I'm with you. No, we're in full agreement on that. Yeah.
Okay. So my next question is a little bit longer, so hang with me, please. But keep in mind that these Zooming with the Alderman series is sponsored by our government committee. And so therefore they are very interested in this question.
Mhm.
So the league members have observed that the committees and then the council regularly pass agenda items for which the actual contents and text of what is being approved are not available for the public to see until days after the meeting. This is because of the provision in Rule 41 that allows the mayor and the city departments to present direct introduction of items to the committee. Because no text is posted, the public does not have a chance to read or comment before the vote is taken. So here's your question. Would you support requiring that any such direct introduction items and their text be made available with an assigned item number to the public no later than 2 business days prior to the meeting?
Yes, and that is part of the standard when it's like, I know the council has it where we have to do that. And I don't know that it's written specifically in the law, but that is a requirement. For example, we've got legislation we're submitting for Wednesday or for tomorrow. We had to get it in by Monday before 10 o'clock to have that process work that way.
And is the copy of your proposed ordinance available to the public right now?
Yeah, I believe so. It would be Chicago Legistar is the website where the legislation
Right.
comes up.
Mhm.
I think the
Yeah.
other part of it is, and I found this out about a month or two ago,
Okay.
in order for anything to be directly introduced to, let's say, the council, sometimes they do it on the council floor, you have to suspend the rules to do so. In order to suspend the rules, a supermajority has to be voting in the affirmative, meaning 34 out of the 50 have to be in support of it. Nobody ever calls roll call to count that. They just kind of do it and they assume, okay, people are in support. And so we learned that when we were trying to move to have a parliamentarian for the city council. That's another change I'd make for the council as well. Having somebody who calls balls and strikes that is truly unbiased and not somebody who's kind of on the mayor's side of certain, arguments. That's when we found out that in order to suspend the rules, you need 34 votes, and it had just been happening the whole time without anybody checking to see if 34 were in support.
Okay. One other point on the committee meetings that I'm curious about is that we go to the legislature and we do follow when the meetings are happening. However, there are a lot of meetings that are combined meetings.
Mhm.
And so several different committees would be meeting together. And those meetings are really not posted.
So they should be when they're joined. They don't happen as often. Like I think in my time here, and there may have been less than 10.
Mhm.
So it doesn't happen terribly often. Most often, they'll kind of sit in the rules committee to languish. Um, I will say, and I'm trying to be very fair, that there have been a lot of opportunities for this administration to be more forthcoming with the information. There's definitely been times where we found out about stuff from the news, and we're talking city council members.
Mm.
So, uh, I'll be nice and say things are a work in progress. And I think
Okay.
I agree that it should get improved.
Got it. Okay, now let's talk about voting. Us, not your voting.
Sure, yeah.
And so currently, when one candidate for mayor or alderman does not receive at least 50% plus 1 vote in the February election, the top 2 vote getters are on the ballot in a runoff election in April. So what is your view, please, about using ranked choice voting in February to determine the winner in lieu of the runoff? And a perfect case example of that was the New York City mayoral race. What are your thoughts on that?
So I like the context because it helped further inform. So I think we had this conversation, I think when I was running the first time, and I'm open to ranked choice voting and seeing how it plays out because sometimes we see the results of our current status quo, right? So I'm open to kind of seeing it. That being said, it's a little challenging because since we haven't seen it play out like in Chicago, I don't really. It's the thing that's very human. I think that happens is any of us would go, well, how would that play out if like I had been in the seat, right? So I think there's a part of that of like processing where like I said, I'm open to seeing it. I think the part that you mentioned, like the New York mayoral and kind of how that mayor is more conservative than I would be, I'll say, right? That I think, again, I'm open to it. So I'm not against it. I think something we also have to work on is really making sure we just inform the public and they're aware about voting in general, because the turnout being what it is it affects all of it as well.
Okay, well, who knows? Maybe it'll be an experiment someday.
I mean, again, we've done a lot worse. So it's worth trying it.
Okay, so now our question is, how can we help you? So the Chicago League if the Chicago League wanted to support one of your initiatives, what steps would you recommend the league take? For example, asking members to call or write their alder people, sending written comments from the league to the appropriate committee members or the city council or the mayor. So focusing on one of your initiatives, is there one that we could help you with?
So I think I've got a couple approaches there, right? So I am a huge proponent of open government. It is how I view what we've been trying to bring to office. And by that, I mean accessible, transparent, and accountable. I would argue I'm one of, if not the most accessible city council member in the city of Chicago, meaning people can hit me up on Facebook, they can hit me up on Twitter, they can hit me up on Instagram, they can email me directly. I give my constituents my cell phone number so they can shoot me a text message. Yeah, it's 773-999-7269.
Oh, I couldn't write fast enough.
Oh, it's recorded, so I'll make sure it's
okay.
But I do, because part of me working in customer service my whole life, it's always involved being able to have that connection. So in that regard, what people could do is reach me directly on any issues they want to talk about or anything we're working on. Now, as it pertains to help getting the word out, really talking to our neighbors. I think a lot of city council members focus on their constituents, and that's fair. I think when I look at our ward, right, we've got our map back here, not all our neighbors know all the work that we're doing and the work that we're trying to do. Like I was able to get $16 million worth of TIF funding to support a streetscape to really change Lincoln from Western to Catalpa and make it an arts district. So we're working on that, right? I was talking to some neighbors yesterday who came in for some art grant that we were working on, and they weren't aware. Like I was like, oh, let me show you. I'll show you what this all looks like. So I think a lot of it is, if our neighbors were to talk to each other and not just the folks who are tied to them through an algorithm on their phone, we'd be in a better place. We'd have neighbors who could talk about things like public safety, about affordability, with people who they may not agree with. But I'd argue building community, it's necessary to have neighbors do that, right? To build coalition, to build the kind of people that move things forward. You got to talk to people you agree with and people you don't agree with. And we could be in better position if we were more able to do that.
So true. Absolutely. Okay, so your term will end next year. And I don't know what your thoughts are for running again, but do you have anything specific that you hope to accomplish before the end of your term in 2023?
Sure. So I haven't made a formal announcement, but I'd say I would love to re-up the contract. Yes, I think the work that we've done.
Hey, we're making news right now.
That's right. Just for us. So I think about it, right? Like, you come into office, head full of steam, wanting to change things. And then we had a global pandemic. So we went from wanting to move things forward to defense, making sure we're taking care of our neighbors and everything that's happening. So there's a lot of things that I've wanted to move on that maybe the time wasn't right because we were dealing with more urgent matters. That being said, I think the federal funding and other opportunities allowed us to move some things, I'd argue, maybe faster than they would have occurred. But for the fact that we found ourselves in a crisis moment. A lot of the development stuff has been really it's been awesome. It's been looking at these empty storefronts and finding ways to partner up with first-time entrepreneurs, helping them find places, creating these business districts, bringing neighbors in to understand how to do it. We've done participatory menu budgeting. So we show neighbors how to vote on how we spend city funds, their tax dollars. We do a community-driven zoning process. So when it comes to any changes, the neighbors are involved there. So that's all this open government mindset. And to continue to do that is something that I really want to kind of grow out. Were it not for COVID, I think we would be knocking at doors all 4 years to really hear from neighbors who may not have known how to engage in government. So I think there's a lot of work to do. And then when you scale that out and look at the city, there's a lot of work to do, right? Like
Yes.
looking at public safety again, looking at what we do with property tax dollars so that people feel a return on their investment, bringing the city together in a way that I think hasn't been done since Harold Washington was mayor. Trying to continue that work is really something that's important to me. And I've definitely done a lot of work with like LGBTQ and trans rights, because we've seen how different communities have been traumatized and affected. So it's been the job of a lifetime, and I want to be able to do more. Like I think that's how I view it.
Wow, that's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean,
Congratulations.
I get pretty smiley about it, but yeah.
Well, you make others smiley about that too. That's really lovely. Okay, so I cannot thank you enough. This has been fabulous. And I know that this will be really, really interesting for everybody to listen to.
Oh, I have
So,
one more thing. Sorry.
yes, yes.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say what an honor it was to actually draft and introduce a resolution celebrating 100 years of the League of Women Voters
Oh,
here. Yeah, so we did it, we drafted it, got it signed by the mayor, and it wasn't until about a month or two ago that Ann Jameson, like we were able to get it over to her, so that it was back into its proper hands. So it was really cool to help and be able to do that at that time.
oh my goodness. We thank you so very, very much for that.
I thank
We
you all.
really do. It was, a century of trying to work and help people.
Yes.
So again, I just thank you very much for being with us today. And I would like to remind everybody that's watching that a link to this program will be found on the Chicago League's website. And everyone who registered for today's program who is not a League member will receive an email with the link, along with an invitation to join the League, as well as to sign up for notices of future programs. And Alderman, I strongly encourage you to put the link in your weekly newsletter so that everybody in your ward can hear the wonderful thoughts you just shared.
Absolutely will.
So next week, again, on Thursday, May 12th at 6 p.m., we hope you will register to join us for Zooming with the Alderman program featuring Alderman Thomas Tooney of the 44th Ward. And I hope that you will review on our website. You'll see links to all of our Zooming programs. And we're thrilled to be able to offer that to everybody to be more informed of all of the alder people that are governing our city. So thank you once again. We really appreciated your time.